Ammons. I think many of you know Ron well. He is a great local historian. He wrote down for me that he wanted me to say local amateur historian because he says he's not professionally trained. But I assure you, he's a great historian, done a lot of research on his own. And we always have a great crowd when he speaks because he is so knowledgeable. And I know many of you knew Ron's father as well. So today Ron is going to be talking to us about the 76th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy. Last year, he made a visit to the Normandy region to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the battles of Normandy. So he's going to talk to you a little bit about that trip as well. So I am going to scoot aside and hand things over to Ron Ammons.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. We're socially distanced here, so everyone knows. That's why I took my mask off, so I'm being correct here. I'll just move right into my material. As Sarah said, I was in Normandy last year for the 75th anniversary. The term D-Day is interesting. I was looking at some research on D-Day, and that term, as a lot of you know, has been used many times. There were many D-Days in World War II. That term was commonly used, but we are familiar with the D-Day on June 6, 1944, the Normandy landings, which initiated the Western Allied effort to liberate Western Europe from Nazi Germany. However, many other invasions and operations have been designated D-Day. Then one of the interesting ones that did not happen was X-Day, which would have been the invasion of mainland Japan, which thankfully didn't have to take place. I'm going to go through hopefully this works. I'm going to go through some slides here. Can everyone see this first picture? This is my father. PFC Jack Ammons of the 90th Infantry Division, one of nearly 3 million American military personnel stationed at one of the 1,100 military camps in Great Britain during the war. Of that 3 million, only quotations, 57,000 American troops were put ashore on D-Day or were dropped by parachute. There were 850,000 German troops awaiting the invasion in France, but not nearly enough of them, as we know now, were combat ready, or they didn't know where we were going to land. So even though we were up against a lot of German troops in France and a lot of panzer divisions, it could have been a lot worse on the beaches. Pictured here are 3 men who served in my dad's 90th Infantry Division. And those of you who know military history, a division is a large body of men. It's usually about 12 to 15,000 men. I don't know how many remain from that division or any other division. I think we're down to about 2% of World War II veterans still living. But these 3 men were in Normandy with me in 2019, and each one of them was from a different regiment of the 90th. You can see on the left, Tom Ingram, who was a machine gunner. He was only 18 years old during the Battle of the Bulge, was in the 359th Infantry Regiment of my dad's 90th Division. Eugene Kleinel in the middle was the 358th, a combat medic. He was probably the liveliest of the 3, and he's almost 98 years old, and he moved around better than I did. And on the right side, Carver McGriff was in my dad's regiment, the 357th, and Carver was wounded only a couple days into the Normandy conflict, and was captured as well, but and then became a minister as his profession. So these 3 gentlemen were with us. And I'll tell you, American veterans from World War II are venerated in France. These guys, the French people who were with us called them rock stars. They were treated like rock stars anywhere we went, and were stopped, gave a lot of autographs, and I'll tell you, they really enjoyed it. It was Tom being now 95, and Eugene at 98, and Carver at 96. To be treated like a rock star was really something to see. Here I am standing on the eastern end of Omaha Beach, where 2,000 American troops were killed, wounded, or missing on D-Day. It's hard to imagine standing in front of this tranquil beach, and it stretches for about 5 miles. You can see it stretching off into the west behind me there. Tranquil today. There are a few reminders, a few bunkers, a few beach obstacles, but to think that we lost 2,000 Americans killed, wounded, or missing is incredible to think of in this day and age. This is obviously the well-known Normandy American Cemetery. And just a couple of facts that are very interesting about this well-known cemetery. It covers 173 acres above, it's above Omaha Beach. If you would go to the left and down, you would be on Omaha Beach. It's above Omaha Beach, 173 acres, contains remains of 9,400 Americans who were killed during the entire Normandy campaign. And the Normandy campaign, as some of you know, was not just a beach landing. It was a 3-month battle in the Normandy region. The cemetery also holds the remains of 4 women. And 150 of the markers, 150 out of the 9,400 are the Jewish Star of David. There are 45 pairs of brothers who are buried in this cemetery. Sad for those families. This is something I did not know. There are 150 African-American troops buried here. 20 Native Americans. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is buried here. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was the assistant commander of the 4th Infantry Division that landed at Utah Beach. And 1 month after the invasion, Teddy died of a heart attack. He's buried in this cemetery. And they reinterred his brother Quentin, who died during World War I, right beside him. So the Roosevelt brothers, both sons of Theodore Roosevelt, our president, are buried together in this cemetery. And also, I just recently came to realize that 14 men from my dad's company, my dad's infantry company, are buried in this cemetery. I knew there were a few, but I was astounded to find out there are 14 men from his company that landed on Utah Beach that are buried here. I'm standing beside, as you can see, my hand is on the grave of a man named Dominik Lisius, who was in my dad's squad. And I didn't know Dom was buried here. And in 2014, President Obama was delivering the address on D-Day. I was at that ceremony. Me and 70,000 of my closest friends were there for that. And I was way back in the back of the cemetery, wandering around, just trying to wait for the service to be over, more or less. And I looked down and I was right at the grave of Dominik Lisius. And my dad saw this gentleman die in combat. And it was just the most astounding coincidence for me to see that he was there. And I've contacted his family. None of them have ever visited the grave. So I sent them some information. And if you ask the curators of the cemetery, they will allow you to have sand from the landing beaches, and you can rub that sand on the marker and it reveals the name more clearly. It's sort of a sign of respect to rub that on there and to have that name highlighted. Then of course the next rain washes it away. So it's kind of a quick remembrance. And here's another one of my more favorite ones in the cemetery. James McMahon was my dad's squad leader. He was 30 years old, which was considered an old man in an infantry company. And as you can see here, if you look at the date on the stone, June 12th, he was killed the first week of the invasion. If I go back one, June 12th for Dominik Lisius. These two gentlemen, who were both in my dad's squad, McMahon being the squad leader, were both killed on the same day. And my dad saw both of these gentlemen make the supreme sacrifice. So those mean a lot to me. And then the two gentlemen who were with me, Tom Ingram there in the middle and Eugene Kleinel on the right, are visiting the grave of a man that they served with. And Eugene on the right, this was one of the medics that served right with him. And he asked the curator on the left if he could help him find the grave. It's hard to find one grave when you're in a field of 9,400. So they took Eugene and Tom to the grave, and this is the first time that Eugene had realized what date his friend had died, and they placed 2 flags on the grave. And when you see the 2 flags, the American flag is always placed on the side that faces the sea. So the channel is on the left, and the French mainland is on the right. They placed those flags on purpose on those sides of the grave. I saw this merchant seaman. I love this guy. He's from England. He's a British merchant seaman who helped drop troops off on D-Day, made several trips inland, and had all these medals and was in a wheelchair and looked very official. And I said, "Sir, would you mind giving me the English salute?" And I thought he would snap one of those backhanded salutes like you see in the movies. And he just gave me a good old American style salute. So I kind of laughed when I saw that, but it was neat to see someone from an allied country there, a British merchant seaman. This gentleman is well known. His name is Norman Shea. He was a medic on Omaha Beach where we lost 1,500 to 2,000 killed and wounded. Norman worked on the beach all morning, running between wounded men and trying to save people. He is a Penobscot tribal elder. He's an Indian. And he was there on 2019 with about 30 people from his tribe, and they were in full Indian regalia. And Norman was dressed in a suit, as you can see, but as you can see by his necklace, he's got an Indian necklace on. The red #1 on his patch signifies that he was in the 1st Infantry Division, and he is the first Native American to have been awarded the French Legion of Honor. Very, very brave fellow. And if you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, and they show a medic walking around on the beach just trying to attend to as many wounded men as he could, that's what Norman Shea did on D-Day on Omaha Beach. This is just me standing in front of a mural in the museum. This mural is huge, and I thought it would make me look like I was on the beach on the day of the invasion. But the problem is I'm in color and the picture's in black and white. But I just thought that was a neat backdrop. This is the famous Point de Hoc, which is the 100-foot promontory of cliff between the American beaches of Omaha and Utah. The 2nd Ranger Battalion famously scaled this cliff. And if you've ever seen the movie The Longest Day, they show these men scaling this 100-foot sheer cliff against enemy fire. It's unbelievable. They were going to go up there to knock out these German gun emplacements. They fought their way to the top, lost most of their regiment, got up there, finally fought off the German infantry and found out these guns had been moved. So they really scaled this cliff in the most heroic of circumstances for almost no reason. But they did move inland and eventually located these guns that had been pulled back so they wouldn't be knocked out by aircraft or by naval fire. And they were still able to complete their mission after going up a 100-foot sheer cliff on ropes being fired upon. It's an incredible feat of valor. And here I am, I'm still on Point de Hoc, and I'm pointing at a small caliber shell hole. This is probably a bazooka fire or something like that. I've always loved military things. I'm always looking for things like this and trying to point them out, but this is where an American bazooka probably impacted this German emplacement. And this is a little larger impact. I'm standing in a shell hole, if you can see me down there. This was probably made by a battleship that firing a 14-inch shell, probably the battleship Texas, fired this shell and made this unbelievable crater. These craters are all over Point de Hoc, and when you see them, I thought to myself, how did these Germans even survive this volley? These shell holes are everywhere, and it's just amazing to stand down in there and think that one shell made this crater. This is the sign at Utah Beach where my father landed. He did not land on D-Day. My father actually landed on June 8th. He always called it D+2 on June 8th. Soldiers were landing for weeks and weeks after the main invasion. And even though he landed 2 days afterwards, you didn't have to go very far to join the combat because we were just grinding our way inland. But there's a very prominent Utah Beach sign that everybody takes a picture by. So I stood there, and right to my left on the right of your picture is where all the American troops went inland. There's a cut in the dunes that you go inland. And this is I'm wearing that hat today. This is the Utah Beach, the official ceremony at Utah Beach. I got VIP treatment. You can see all the common folk got to sit in the stands back there while I was with a World War II veteran, so I got to go up closer to the actual ceremonies. So that was kind of nice to be able to get closer to the wreath laying and what else was going on and the remarks that were being made. They were even awarding medals to World War II veterans. Any living World War II veteran that had taken part in the Normandy invasion was awarded the Legion of Honor, which is like receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor in the States. So this was quite a thing. Here I am walking on Utah Beach. Here again, as I said, my father landed 2 days after the invasion, but before he was able to get off his transport, his large transport ship was docked out there off the beach, and a fighter plane was coming at their transport. It was going very slow. It was on fire. It was an American plane. And as it drew closer and all the guys got up on the rail of the ship looking at this airplane that was pointed right at them, and they're thinking, what's going on? Well, the pilot had been shot up. He had bailed out of the airplane. This airplane was heading right for his transport with no pilot. At the very last minute, it winged up and went in the water right beside Dad's ship. And Dad said the only thought that was going through his mind is, this is great. I'm going to get pasted before I even get off my transport ship to go inland. But they made it, and this is Utah Beach. And there are flags above Utah Beach that represent the Allied nations which fought together. And not only did Americans land, but soldiers from all the member states of the United Kingdom, Canadians, French, Free French, Czechoslovakians, Polish, and Norwegians all landed at Utah Beach to join the fight. Those flags are all up at the crest of Utah Beach. Here is a group of us marching, and I'm actually the third person back. I'm dressed like a World War II soldier in authentic gear. I actually got to dress up with some reenactors. So I looked like a World War II GI, got to dress like my dad would have been dressed. The only problem was Dad was lugging his 60 pounds at age 18, and I'm trying to lug my 60 pounds at age 60 here. But the neat thing about this picture is the guys in the soft hats are modern day members of the 4th Infantry Division. The 4th Infantry landed at Utah Beach, and the modern day members of the 4th made the march from Utah Beach to the village of St. Marie de Mont on the 75th anniversary of the occurrence. And not very often do modern military march with reenactors, so they had to obtain special permission. But to march with members of our modern military was really a thrill for me. And this young man here must have thought I looked like I was getting tired, so he said, "Hey, would you mind if I carried that World War II gear? I would like to see what that felt like." So this 19-year-old young man, this member of the 4th Infantry, took the helmet, the rifle, which is a replica. It's an exact replica, the 60-pound pack, the bandoliers, and wore all this stuff. And I was happy for him to do that. I put on his soft hat. I thought, this is a good deal for me. I think I look a little bit like Clint Eastwood here, don't I, with a young recruit? But that was fun. I also want you to notice on my shoulder, there's a covering, it looks like. And what that is, that's an actual thing that was done on D-Day, where they didn't want the Germans to know which divisions were landing, so they wore coverings over their division patches. So that green piece of cloth on my shoulder is covering my 90th Division patch. It was a strategic move here. We finally made it to St. Marie de Mont, which was the first stop that my dad made off Utah Beach. They marched 4 miles. I'll tell you, those GI boots that we're wearing were not that comfortable even for 4 miles. So I don't know how my dad marched 1,200 miles across Europe in those things without his feet falling off. And when they have these commemorations on D-Day, and they have them every year, but when you have a special one like the 75th anniversary or the 70th anniversary, a lot of reenactors showed up. So this being the 75th anniversary, there were people dressed like American GIs in authentic uniforms everywhere in Normandy, everywhere. Thousands and thousands of people dressed like American GIs, mostly like paratroopers. But the funny thing was, very few of these reenactors are Americans, very few. I was one of the few. Most are Czechs or Poles or French. They just admire the history. The fighting was done on their territory, so they have a great appreciation for it. So there I am in the middle, leaning against a tree, probably about ready to fall over. Well, I'm surrounded by French and Czechoslovakians that are dressed like American soldiers from World War II. Then this was kind of neat for me. I got to fill my canteen. At least I'm acting like I'm filling my canteen. It's not really happening. But my dad's regiment actually filled their canteens at this very fountain 75 years ago on this day. So I'm leaning over, trying not to fall over from my pack, acting like I'm filling my canteen where my father probably filled his canteen 75 years before. Then we had a little ceremony at the town square like they would have had during the liberation of these towns. And the great thing here is these guys are a lot younger than I am. I said I'm the oldest GI in Normandy. And the man in the back, if you can see him with the glasses on to the right, he actually passed out during this little commemoration that we had. We sang the French national anthem, sang the American national anthem, and it was pretty warm. And we're in full gear. And this young man almost fell into the back of my legs. And I'm thinking, what is the matter with this young guy? He should be in better shape than this. And then we climbed into a truck just to get the full effect. We climbed into a deuce-and-a-half truck and got to talk to some of these young French guys. They know about 2 words of English, so it's very interesting to speak with them. A couple of them can speak English, but mostly we're working with hand signs, so it's just kind of fun to be in the gear. This is a famous Lieutenant Dick Winters. I'm not sure if anybody recognizes that name. He is a famous leader, a commander of Company E of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne. That's a mouthful, but he was made famous in the movie The Band of Brothers. He is the lead actor. He's a real guy. He lived almost to 100 years old. He got to see this statue to him dedicated before he passed, and it's a very famous place. And on top of this statue, as a sign of respect, many people have placed mementos and pennies, and there's just so many mementos that were placed on top of this great statue, and it's a great looking statue. And I can't remember which town it's in Normandy, but this is to Lieutenant Dick Winters. And I didn't realize that my father had a connection to Lieutenant Dick Winters. And I found out that on this spot, and it's in my dad's memoir, a C-47 transport airplane crashed with all the paratroopers on board. They couldn't get out. And this happened a number of times. But Dad mentions in his memoir that they marched past this site, and all that was left of the airplane were the ashes of the plane and the helmets that were on the soldier's head. If you can imagine, that's all that was left. A terrible sight. But on the plaque, I realized that Dick Winters was the replacement for the lieutenant that was killed in this crash. So there was a connection between Dick Winters and my father. Just all these thousands of troops crossing each other's paths in Normandy. Now here again, I'm referring to the Band of Brothers. Perhaps you have not seen this movie, but it's one of the greatest documentaries ever. And this is another sight from that movie, The Band of Brothers, where a guy with the greatest nickname ever, Wild Bill Garner, shot up a German column by himself with a machine gun, and it's in the movie. And this is exactly where that happened. So I'm standing on the spot where Wild Bill Garner got his nickname. This is the famous church in the village of St. Mary Église, where the American paratroopers were dropped directly onto the village. The American paratroopers, as most of you know, were spread out all over Normandy. As a matter of fact, they were so scattered accidentally, the Germans thought we had more troops than we did, so it actually worked in our favor. But in this little village, this beautiful little French village of St. Mary Église, the paratroopers dropped right onto the village at 5 o'clock in the morning. And a trooper named John Steele actually got hung up on the steeple and actually was at this spot hanging there watching the battle at 5:30 in the morning. Couldn't free himself. Obviously, he would have fallen to his death. So he's hanging at the church watching the battle. And ever since then, the people of St. Mary Église have kept a mannequin up there on the church. It's there all year to commemorate John Steele hanging there watching the battle. Here's one of the, where the two military veterans that were with me, Eugene and Tom, became rock stars. Every time these guys sat down, they were swarmed by civilians, and you can see some of our modern military are there just asking questions. These guys in the modern military, what was it like in Normandy? Were these stories true? Where were you? What did you do? So I tell you what, I felt like such a patriot watching these young men talking to the older veterans and exchanging stories. Very patriotic. And then they had commemorations. This is fireworks in the village, right in the same church you just saw the paratrooper hanging from. They had a fireworks ceremony on June 6th commemorating D-Day. So not only did we get the feeling of D-Day by being in the actual spot when these fireworks were exploding, it was almost like the sound of battle. These are modern American paratroopers, and these guys, they are rowdy. And this is why we win wars. These guys are rowdy. I can imagine them being in a battle zone, being very aggressive. They're aggressive types of people. They were singing in St. Mary Église all their paratrooper songs. And the great thing about this was there was a contingent of German paratroopers, modern German military, who have been our allies since the war. And they were singing their songs, and then our American boys would sing a song, and then the Germans would sing a song. It was almost like a sing-off between these paratroopers. And the louder, the better. And as you can see, the more beer, the better. This is a church. I cannot remember the name of the small town, the small village. There's a church that's dedicated to our airborne, because our airborne troopers liberated this village. And I'm lighting candles here in this small church in dedication to our World War II servicemen. And there are stained glass windows in this little church that are dedicated to our airborne. It's really an interesting thing to be in a little Catholic church where the stained glass windows say Airborne or 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne. And then of all things, one of the pews, you see that stain on the pew, that is actually the blood of an American serviceman who was wounded, who was laying on this pew during the battles and was tended to in this church, and his blood stained the pew. So this is really some historic, really a historic site. This is a memorial to General Donald Pratt of the 101st Airborne Division, whose glider crashed in the clump of trees right behind the memorial. The trees are still there. General Pratt was the highest ranking American officer killed on D-Day. a one-star general. His glider's pilot was Mike Murphy of Findlay, Ohio. You've probably heard of Mike Murphy. He founded the aeronautical division of the Marathon Oil Company. Well, the glider that Murphy was piloting was overloaded. He had General Pratt as his rider, and they trusted him to Murphy because Murphy was the best pilot in the glider force. He led the glider force, but his glider was overloaded as he tried to land it on the morning of June 6th. The grass was wet, the glider was heavy, and he couldn't stop it, and it crashed into the clump of trees. Pratt was killed. Murphy was laying in the wreckage. Germans were inspecting the wreckage briefly, and Murphy thought he was going to have to do something drastic, but they didn't see him and moved on. And that was it for the war for Murphy. A very prolific story. And I didn't realize there was a monument there until I saw it and read it. And I told my French buddy, he said, this pilot was from my hometown. This is an actual memorial in the town of Perrier, another town that was liberated by my dad's unit. They liberated many French villages in Normandy. These villages are everywhere down these winding roads. The cities, the old churches, the towns, many of them look exactly like they did during the war by design. It looks like a shell crashed in the street. This is actually a fountain that was created to look like a bomb crater. We actually bombed this town, our Air Force did, to get the Germans out. And as so often happens in wartime, many French civilians were killed. And they had forgiven us. I mean, obviously we liberated them. But I thought this was amazing that this fountain was created to look like a bomb crater. And here I am on the right helping one of our veterans and two other gentlemen lay a wreath at a memorial that's actually dedicated to my dad's 90th Infantry Division. There's a bronze statue of four members of my dad's unit who were killed, and we got to lay a wreath there, which I thought was a great honor. And you can see modern American military standing in the background as a color guard. And these are some of our modern American military. And I'll tell you what, being around these young men and women, I was so proud. They are, and you can see the two gals in the middle, two ladies in the middle. These soldiers are professional. They're very, they have great manners. They say yes sir, no sir to everyone. They're physically strong. They give such a great impression of our nation. And if you look at their shoulder patches, this may be hard to see. There are different units mixed in here. The lady who was in the black beret who was standing in the second row, she has the patch, the yin and the yang, the patch of the 29th Infantry Division, which actually landed at Omaha Beach. And behind her is another lady in the black beret who was wearing the patch of the 10th Mountain Division, the X, the 10th Mountain. These are warriors. The third man in on the front, third man from the right, has the TO patch on his shoulder. That's my dad's unit, the 90th Infantry Division, which still exists as the 90th Sustainment Brigade. This is the town of Peekaville. They're having a commemoration, as all the French villages were having commemorations of their liberations. And at Peekaville, this contingent of American soldiers was there during the celebration. And also, members of the German military were there. And this is a platoon of German military, modern. And I asked one of my French buddies, I said, what do the French people think of this? And he said, that it's not a problem. They've been our NATO partner since 1955. They're an ally. Only some of the older French have a little bit of mixed feelings seeing a German military, but no problems. These people are our allies and have been for decades. This is me with Eugene. I didn't realize how short Eugene was until I stood beside him for this picture. But this is at a French chateau where there actually was a medical tent set up during World War II. And these chateaus are beautiful. I mean, they're actually homely, but they're beautiful in a homely way, and the large roofs on them. But they had an authentic medical unit set up here. And I took Gene around this site and I said, Gene, does this look like what it would have looked like during World War II? And he would explain the instruments, and yes, we did it this way, and oh, this should be here and whatnot. So that was so interesting to have a 97-year-old man. It was just so sharp. And you can see on Gene's chest there, he is wearing some very important decorations. He's got the combat infantry badge. He's got many campaign ribbons. This little guy who was so polite, he's a grandfather, a great-grandfather, nicest guy in the world, but he was a warrior in the 1940s. You better believe it. This is another very interesting place. My father took part in this battle near what was called Hill 122 in Normandy. This, you can see the shadow in the field there. If you look close enough, there's the wheat is not growing quite as much as it is in the other areas. This is the shadow of an American tank in a Norman field where the tank was hit and burned. 75 years ago, this tank burned so ferociously and lost so much fuel and oil and gas in the fire that the wheat still does not grow properly 75 years later. A tank shadow. This is another interesting place. This is a little village in France, in Normandy, France, called Corral. And they told the mayor of Corral, I don't know how many citizens live here, it's probably the size of Arlington, Ohio. They were told that Eugene, the medic who had worked as a medic in this town during the Battle of Normandy, they told the mayor he was coming with us. So the school children came out, and it was almost like a one-room schoolhouse. These children of different ages were together because there's not that many children in the town, but they were waving French flags, waving American flags. When we arrived, they were playing patriotic music. We got out of the car, we went in the mayor's office, and you can see Eugene sitting at the table, and he was made an honorary citizen of Corral by the mayor. And Gene's just a common guy. He didn't know to give a speech or anything. He said, I just like for some of the children to sit on my lap. I just want to partake with the school children here. So it was just a neat ceremony, but very meaningful. This is another cemetery. There are many cemeteries in France, some from World War I, some from World War II. This is the American cemetery at St. James, France, in the Brittany region, which is west of Normandy. These are regions, obviously, like we would call the Midwest or the Mideast in the States, but this is in the Brittany region. Many men from my dad's division were lost as they initially moved towards the western coast of France after they landed. They turned west before they turned south. And the ones that were lost in the Brittany region, some of them are buried in this cemetery. Also very beautiful. One of my French friends, an older gentleman, reminded me, he said, when you see these beautiful manicured cemeteries with these white crosses, just remember what carnage this was wrought from. The bodies were mangled and everything was destroyed, and now everything looks beautiful and manicured, but it belies the fact of what damage and devastation and loss of life there was 75 years ago. And then, speaking of Native Americans, a group of Comanche Indians were arriving just as we were leaving the cemetery. They came to commemorate a few of the members of their tribe who were killed in this campaign in France. So they're dressed in to signify their members of the Comanche tribe. They went out to the graves of a couple of young men who were lost and performed Indian rituals at those graves, which I thought was really interesting. And I spoke with them for a few minutes. Here I am in the streets of the medieval city of St. Suzanne, where the history of 1944 mingles with the history of the centuries which preceded it. So this village has been fought for many times in history, including William the Conqueror tried to conquer this village. And here I am up on the ramparts of the castle of St. Suzanne. During the 11th century, William the Conqueror had laid siege to this very town for 3 years and never conquered it. William the Conqueror, this is the only city in France, village or castle that he was unable to conquer as he was pillaging the Normandy area. But my dad's 90th Infantry Division was able to chase the German army out of St. Suzanne. So they were the first conquering army in all those centuries, which I'm kind of proud of. And I saw while they had the commemoration at St. Suzanne, I saw this lady on the right, probably she would have been about 5 years old during the war. She was holding this picture that I am now holding right now, but she was holding this picture, and I recognized this picture as my dad's battalion commander. And I asked her, why are you holding this picture? And she says, let me tell you a story why I'm holding this picture. This building that you are now standing in front of was my dad's bakery in St. Suzanne during the war. And as the shells were flying and the Americans were trying to chase the Germans out, my dad kept baking. He didn't want to stop. He needed to continue to work. He said, go to the basement. So we went around to the back, and she showed me the basement that her dad told her to hide in while he continued to bake, until a shell went through the building and exploded on the outside and wounded this officer. So that's why she was holding the picture. And I think I'm the only guy that recognized who it was. So I'm grateful that I got to talk to her and explain that I knew who he was. And she got to show me her little hiding place when she was a 5-year-old child. And it was a great little story. And then along the way, this is a picture of my friend Vincent on the left. He's the main French guide. speaking with Gene at a place where Gene had worked at a field hospital during the war. And Gene is, you can tell Gene is searching his memory here for trying to give Vinny some idea as to what happened there. One thing I've learned about World War II veterans, especially guys like Gene remembers everything. A lot, these experiences that he had were so personal, the memories are vivid. And we can all think of times in our lives when things happen and the memories are vivid. And when Gene acted like he couldn't remember something, and right here is one of those times, he really did remember it. He just thought, I can't explain this. I can't tell these guys what happened. So I'm going to just say I don't remember. I found out that that's the game that Gene was playing, but I appreciated that and I understood it. Here I am in the village of Montsurs. And Montsurs is a little village, probably the size of Ottawa, where my dad was the lead scout and got to lead his regiment into this town. And thankfully, they sent these lead scouts out to see if they'd get shot at. So luckily, as my dad walked into this town, the Germans were going out the back door, I call it. So as we entered, the Germans knew they were outnumbered. They were heading out. We're exiting without a fight. I'm holding a picture that my dad took in 1969 on this exact spot. He came back 25 years after the liberation of Montsurs. I'm holding the picture on the exact spot 50 years after that picture was taken. So I get to say that my dad was the lead liberator. But thankfully for Dad, the Germans decided not to put up a fight. And then this road and many towns in France, little villages, have a street called the Route of the Liberation. You can see the sign I'm pointing to. It says Rue de la Libération. That means the Route of the Liberation. This is the town that Dad's regiment moved down as they liberated Montsurs. Beside me is Gene. Beside him is Tom, and then Tom's son and Rex, who's a friend of us. So we're all there on the Route of Liberation. And the sign above that says, the American Army liberated Montsurs on August 6, 1944 from the German Army. And I thought, this is like my adopted town now since Dad walked in first. And it was just a coincidence that he did. It was one of those just coincidences that somebody had to walk in first, right? This is another little town called Ernay. And the reason I had my picture taken in this town is as my dad's unit approached Ernay, they're just racing down these roads, liberating these towns. Some of them were fought for, many were not. My dad got off the truck that he was riding on and walked up to this old French farmer and said, "Hey, Pops, do you know which way is Ernay from here?" And my dad's lieutenant said, "Hey, you stoop, don't be telling them where we're going. How do you know this guy's not going to run and tell the Germans that we're headed to Ernay?" And my dad looked at this old farmer and he said, "I don't think this guy is going to be a threat. I don't think he's going to run to the Germans. I think he's happy to be liberated." So I had my picture taken. And I put this on my Facebook page, and one of my French friends put a message on there and says, "Hey, do you see that red truck down on the right? My mom's shop is right there." So it's a small world over there, let me tell you. This is a picture that was taken before the war of a gentleman who was in a unit that was attached to my dad's. His name is Private Ronald Wilson. You can see him there with his young daughter and his wife. Happy times before the war. Unfortunately, Ronald Wilson went missing in action during World War II. Has never been found. And this is an excavation site where my friend Vincent, they're trying to find the remains of Ronald Wilson and anybody else they can find. There are crews over there working all the time trying to find MIAs. And every once in a while they find something. They'll find a part of a body. At this particular site, they had found a couple pieces of uniforms. They weren't sure if that was Ronald Wilson's or whatnot, but they were excavating and trying to find things. Very interesting, I thought, trying to repatriate these servicemen with their remaining families. And this is my last slide, and you're going, yay, his last slide. This is a cadaver dog. And there is a group of people called Honor Flight. I know we have another Honor Flight over here, but excuse me, it's History Flight, not Honor Flight. Honor Flight is the one that Deb Wickerham heads up and takes the veterans to Washington, D.C. There's a group called History Flight. They enlist volunteers to go over in everywhere. They go to France, they go to the South Seas and try to find people missing in action and try to find remains. And this cadaver dog was actually working when I was there at this site. And I asked his handler, I said, "How effective is the cadaver dog?" Because these remains are 75 years old. And he said he can find remains up to 100 to 125 years old. And I thought, that is incredible to me that this dog's sense of smell can locate remains that have been buried for 125 years. So they hadn't made any discoveries on this particular piece of land, but I watched this dog carefully as he was nosing around the property. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. And I'm hoping that someone in the other room, like Joy Bennett, knows that I've ended my presentation. If there are any questions, I will certainly take those questions.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, if you could please put those into the chat box and I will read them to Ron.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I was supposed to do what I just did, Joy, but I did it.
Yes, you got out of your presentation. I'm very proud of you.
Okay. I will say one thing. I don't consider myself an expert on the Battle of Normandy. I was doing some research before I even did this presentation today to try to make myself a little smarter, which in my case is easy to do. And there is so much information on any historical item, as you well know. I thought, there is so much that I don't know about the Battle of Normandy. I'm almost embarrassed. What I do know is what my dad told me in my 2 trips there, but I'm not an expert on the battle by any means. And there are probably some of you people who probably had a relative or maybe even a brother or sister or a parent that might have even been involved over there that might be able to tell me something. So if you do, let me hear it. Anybody have anything to share?
So far, I have nothing in the group chat, but please go ahead and type in any questions or comments you might have. I'm sure Ron is anxious to hear what you're thinking right now.
Hey, Ron, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Tom Brumley.
It's exactly. Ron, my understanding about that glider crash that killed that general is that that Mike Murphy is on, that the general, unbeknownst to Mike, had his seats armor plated, which completely threw off the weight and balance of the glider and why it crashed in the first place and killed the guy.
That's exactly what I've heard, Tom. That's excellent. Yeah, he had some armor plating put in the bottom so the ground fire wouldn't come through the glider and kill the general. And I believe they were also hauling in his glider the general's armored, armor plated Jeep. And Jeep came forward and everything. And Mike Murphy was an excellent pilot. He was he led the glider program, as you probably know. He actually saved it. There had been some accidents in training, and Mike Murphy of Findlay, Ohio, saved the glider program, the entire glider program, and was the lead pilot and crashed because of no fault of his own. He landed as he should, but couldn't stop in the grass. It was a dew-covered morning. The glider was overloaded because of the armor plating, like Tom said, and he just crashed into that clump of trees, killed the general. Murphy was never faulted because of it, but it shouldn't have happened. He was an expert pilot. He was a great stunt pilot from what I hear. Tom, maybe you've heard about Murphy's stunt pilot days back in the 30s.
My mother happened to be a pilot in those days. And she had heard of Mike Murphy before my mom was from Iowa. There was a number of acrobatic moves with his name attached to it.
So your mother was a pilot back in the 30s?
My mother was the first licensed woman pilot in her home state of Iowa.
That is amazing. That sounds to me like you should give a presentation, Tom. I bet you've got enough information. You could be a little bit spellbinding with that. I'd love to.
I could. Mom, she knew Amelia Earhart on a first name basis.
Oh my gosh. See, that's what I'm saying. Here I am at 63 years old acting like a history expert, and you people could probably each write your own history on something amazing that I would love to hear. She knew Amelia Earhart. I heard some of the things about Murphy that were interesting because my uncle, who's still living, he's 98, saw some of Murphy's shows. And Tom, you probably saw something. But Murphy would land his plane on a trailer that was being pulled by a car. Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't heard that one.
Actually land, do a touch and go on a moving trailer. And he had another airplane that was a biplane, the 2 wings, obviously, and had wheels on the top wing and then the regular wheels, and it could land this plane upside down. You've heard that one.
I heard that one.
Yeah. That at the Findlay Airport, which only became the Findlay Airport because of Murphy's doing, from what I hear.
Did you know that Findlay Airport was a training center for pilots in the Second War?
I have never heard that.
I knew a fellow who was one of the student pilots.
Is he still living, Tom?
Pardon? No, he's gone. No, yeah, but he told me he knew Kleinel, Ohio, because that's where he trained. I think with the Navy. I think it was these are primary planes that they were first flown in before they matriculated up to more advanced planes. You know, Murphy back in the 50s had a Mercedes Gullwing. He parked out at the Marathon airport.
Uh-huh.
It got stolen. He never got it back.
Airplane stolen?
No, his Mercedes Gullwing.
Oh, I got you.
He never got it back.
Never got it back. They weren't
No.
able to trace it. All right, I'll admit I have it. It's in my backyard, Tom.
I'm sure you did. Well, there was a marathon pilot by the name of Don Phillips, who flew 70-some missions in a B-26. And the B-26 didn't fly well in the first place. And so he came back and flew for Marathon, and he told me, you ever heard of a Beach stagger wing?
I have heard. I know what it is. I do know what it is.
Okay. He told, and Marathon had stagger wings. And he told me he took delivery. He went out to, I think, Nebraska, where they were built. He took delivery of the last stagger wing ever built.
Oh my gosh!
And brought it back to Marathon. He used it as one of their commercial planes for years. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That plane's not in a museum right now somewhere, you know?
Yep. I knew a fellow had one. I got a ride in one.
Oh my gosh!
And I got a ride in a P-51 too.
See, now you're talking about my bucket list now, Tom. Those are things that I want to do. And you talked about B-26. We had several gentlemen from around here who were B-26 pilots. I heard that was a terribly difficult plane to fly. And I don't know if you knew Jim Logsdon Sr., who worked for National Lineman Stone for years. He was a B-26 pilot and was shot down and made a prisoner in Italy. So he had an interesting experience. Got shot down on his 28th mission.
Really?
Went to a Catholic church in Italy, walked a ways and said, "I'll be safe in this church." And went in and started talking to the minister, and here came the German troops, and they got him right there.
Yeah. Well, we had P-51 pilots. So we had Red Reinbold, who was our judge here in town, and the fellow had the garden center here in town for years as a P-51 pilot too. Name escapes me right now, but yeah.
Yeah.
DeHaven's?
DeHaven. Yeah. DeHaven was a P-51 pilot. Flew a lot of missions.
And DeHaven even spent some time with the second version of the Flying Tigers, I believe, in China. After the original volunteers were asked to, they were told they had to join the United States Army Air Corps.
Right.
DeHaven was one of those pilots that flew the Flying Tiger aircraft, but as a U.S. pilot, not a volunteer for the Chinese. But yeah,
most of those were P-40s.
Right.
Which were okay airplanes, but the Zeros are much quicker, so they had to. So wasn't it? Well, then the Navy had a bunch of really good airplanes that could keep up with the Zeros, and then finally the P-51 took over.
Tom, you need to write some of these down because you got some knowledge I could use. That thing about your mother and knowing Amelia Earhart, oh my gosh, something's got to be done about that. That's got to be written down, whatever you can remember.
Oh yeah, well, mom got her license in 29 because she was such a fan of aviation, and of course she got her license right when the Depression hit, and so she ferried airplanes, Ronca, actually out of Cincinnati for a while, and then the Depression really got bad, so she wanted to stay in aviation, so she decided she wanted to become an airline stewardess. Well, in those days, to be an airline stewardess, you had to be a registered nurse.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So Mom went and got her RN as one of the first 100 or so stewardesses hired by United Airlines.
This is just history on history, Tom. You've got to do something about this. You can't let that slip away. That's got to be, sit at your computer and start knocking out that story. I always
It's written down somewhere.
good. I'd like to see it.
Yeah, well, it was written up. Mom's written up several times in the Courier, so I have all those articles.
I've got to see that. You know, Mike Murphy's another guy who's had things written up about him, but there needs to be a book, or he's worthy of a movie. All the things.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
There's still people around here who flew with Murphy, who knew him well, and what a piece of history that guy's. I've always said Hancock County's got an amazing military history between guys like Dick Wilson, who worked with the atomic bomb project, and Murphy and some others, and what a rich military tradition.
And then there's Tom Child.
Oh yeah, Pearl Harbor, and he wrote up his experiences. You've probably seen those.
Oh yeah.
Tom Child's.
He was convinced Roosevelt knew all about it.
I know. He's one of the more interesting veterans I ever talked to, because he was convinced, wasn't he, that Roosevelt allowed that to happen fully.
Yep, he promoted it.
But he was convincing, and he's written that up, and I have it. I have that account that he wrote, and yeah. And if Tom didn't convince you with his writing, he'd take you down physically with it.
or in semaphores. Everybody had to know the semaphores too.
He was quite a guy, and just passed away at what 98 or 99, didn't he?
Yep.
What a guy. Yeah. Walked around Pearl Harbor for 2 or 3 days after the attack because his ship was sunk in dry dock, and just patrolled around on foot around the harbor for 2 or 3 days and ate his meals on different ships. It was an amazing story.
Yeah, he couldn't get orders to do anything else.
I'm trying to imagine ordering Tom Child to do anything anyway.
Yeah, that's Tom.
Anybody else have a question or comment, or can I always, when I have an audience, I always say, somebody give me something, or I want to know what your relatives did, or what your dad or what your uncle did.
Well, we don't have anything in the group chat. I think everybody was really enjoying listening to you and Tom there for a while. But I guess if there are no other questions, we could probably close things up unless you've got something else you want to add, Ron.
I'll wait. I recognize a number of these people, including my neighbor, Sally Elsie. I see Sally there. Best neighbor in Finley. Okay.
This was very enjoyable. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I enjoyed sharing it.
Much.
Finley's history is so wonderful. There's so much rich history here. And before we got on, we were speaking about, Joy and I were speaking about Fort Finley, its illustrious history, the tiny little supply fort that it was. And then after the local militia left, it was chopped up by the local Indians for firewood. and Joy reminded me that a couple of the blockhouses remained, right, Joy?
Yep. Because there were settlers living in them.
So that's funny. Okay, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.